President Donald Trump says the U.S. will start escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz today in a move aimed at freeing up vessels stranded there. But Iran has warned that any interference by the U.S. in the Strait would be a violation of their ceasefire.
It comes as Tehran reviews America's response to its 14-point plan to end the war. The U.S. leader describes negotiations as very positive, though he had previously said the latest draft doesn't go far enough to satisfy America's demands. So for more on the U.S. plan to free up the Strait of Hormuz and negotiations to end the war, let's speak with Jamsheed Choksy. He's distinguished professor at the University of Indiana, Bloomington. Professor, very good to see you again. Let me start, by asking you about this latest announcement from President Trump saying that, the U.S. will start escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz, something it didn't do before because obviously it was too dangerous. So what exactly has changed, Professor? Is the U.S. Navy really ready now? Is Project Freedom another pressure tactic from Donald Trump?
I think it is another pressure tactic from President Trump to engage the Iranians and force them to continue negotiating. As the U.S. Navy moves through the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranians have a choice to continue negotiating or to fire on U.S. ships. If they do, then they would be the ones re-triggering the war. If they choose the diplomatic path, then the negotiations will hopefully continue.
It's still early on, but Professor, if this goes ahead, how would this actually work? I mean, given Iran has warned that it would be a violation of the ceasefire, and which sort of vessels are likely to be prioritized here?
That is an interesting question. Presumably, one priority will be to escort oil tankers from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the other Gulf countries out of the Persian Gulf so that they can start resupplying the world for energy. The other aspect would be, of course, to ensure that cargo carrying humanitarian reliefs to those Gulf countries can also flow successfully in and out.
Does this create space for de-escalation, or are we entering a more dangerous phase where any sort of misstep at sea could trigger direct confrontation and potentially derail any ceasefire efforts?
You got it quite right. It is a dangerous space in which any confrontation could indeed derail the current negotiations. And I think what the United States here is gambling on is that the Iranians will want to continue the negotiations. It is in the Iranian government's interest to drag out the negotiations as long as possible so that they can rearm themselves, they can reestablish their financial stability, at least in terms of being able to supply their military. So I think what the United States is gambling is that the Iranians will no longer try to intercept commercial cargo passing through the Gulf.
Professor, so that's the hope, on the part of the United States. But I'm wondering if you really think Tehran is going to view this, in a positive way, view this as a humanitarian gesture, as President Trump is putting it. I mean, Project Freedom was something that was announced after it said it was reviewing the U.S. response to its 14-point plan. So I'm wondering, is this potentially positive in terms of the Iranian reaction, or is this another potential spanner in the works, for ongoing negotiations, which I should add, Trump calls very positive?
That's interesting, yes, because initially Trump was very negative to even the second Iranian proposal. He now considers it positive. When we look at the proposals, what has changed between the first and second Iranian proposals is the Iranians now have merged together. The initial proposal wanted all hostilities to cease first against Iran and against Hezbollah. Then the second stage would have been discussion about the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Now those two have fused together to say hostilities will cease and negotiations on the waters will begin. I think the Americans at this point are moving forward on that basis to say, okay, if we are indeed going to be no hostilities and indeed going to negotiate the freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, then let's actually put that to the test. Let's see whether the Iranians really mean it. Because while Trump in one voice says he's willing to negotiate, he's also made it very clear that he's very willing to, and the United States is capable of resuming attacks against Iran.
And Professor, he also said that Iran hasn't paid a big enough price. What did you make of that statement? What do you think he means by this price that needs to be paid?
I think what he really gets at is that he himself understands that the real solution to all this, to the nuclear issue, to the threats against commercial navigation, that the ultimate solution is regime change. He also realizes that that is very difficult to achieve without the Iranian people taking to the street. So what he seems to be doing is both in terms of blockading the exit to the Persian Gulf, also with the American Navy now seizing Iranian oil tankers around the world, he seems to be ramping up the pressure. Because the one thing we also do know is that the Iranian people are becoming increasingly desperate. And so the US government, on one hand, is negotiating, the other hand, it is threatening. And additionally, what it is also doing is upping this economic pressure in the hope that the Iranian regime will buckle.
And Professor, I want to ask you about this economic pressure specifically. We know that Iranian ports have been blocked by the U.S. blockade, but I'm wondering about the land routes available to Iran. I mean, are they significant? We're talking about, of course, neighboring Afghanistan, neighboring Turkmenistan. Is there enough coming through, perhaps, to sustain the economy and the regime in Iran longer?
There is a sufficient amount of civilian supplies coming through to sustain the regime, not the people, not the economy. And so that's the balancing point. At what point, we've seen, in the last few weeks, the Iranian rial has moved from about 1.2 million to the dollar to about 1.6. As supplies dry up in Iran, then the question is, how long can the regime continue to divert resources only to itself, its war, and its supporters? And that seems to be part of the pressure. Because let's keep in mind, Afghanistan is ultimately not a safe route for transit of whether it is commercial or military materials in and out of Iran. The Turkmenistan and the Central Asian republics, the United States is already monitoring. So some supplies do get in and out, just like ships do slip through the American blockade in and out. But increasingly, the noose is tightening economically on the Iranian regime.
All right, understood. Professor, thank you so much for your insights and for talking to us on the show today. Jamsheed Choksy is Distinguished Professor at the University of Indiana, Bloomington.